The Battle of Britain, as most historians will describe it, is a catalogue of aircraft types, squadrons, dates, and casualty lists, but the truth is that for the people who lived beneath the sky where it happened, it felt nothing like a set of timelines. It felt like a season of thunder that never truly ended, a summer where every cloud seemed to carry a shadow, and that shadow might be a bomber or the broken wing of a fighter spiraling downward, and if you want to understand it not as a chapter in a textbook but as a living, breathing experience, then you have to begin with a man like Arthur Lane, a quiet newspaper seller at King's Cross Station who had never left London and never learned to look upward with suspicion until the war forced him to. Arthur used to say that before 1940, the sky was just something to complain about, the rain, the cold, the grayness that rolled across the city, but by July, he felt something shift in the air long before the first siren's wail told the truth, and because he had lived his whole life on the same corner, he noticed the smallest changes, like how the pigeons seemed restless, how even the smell of the city seemed sharper, metallic, as if the air itself was preparing for something it knew humans didn't. On a morning early in July, with the sun barely lifting over the rooftops, he had just arranged his papers into neat stacks, the Times, the Daily Herald, the Telegraph, when a sound rolled across London, faint at first, a heavy vibration that made the awning above him tremble ever so slightly, and when he looked up, he saw dots on the horizon, slow-moving, dark, almost peaceful, and he had no idea that he was looking at the opening notes of what the world would come to call the Battle of Britain. At first, people stared upward with curiosity rather than fear, because the mind cannot immediately accept that danger could be arriving through something as beautiful as a summer sky, but when those tiny specks glinted in the light and spread into a wider formation, the whispers began, German planes, bombers, they're coming, and yet even then, no one ran, no one screamed, because Londoners had not yet been taught how to be afraid of the sky. Arthur stood frozen as two RAF fighters, Spitfires, though he didn't yet know the name, cut across the clouds with astonishing speed, like silver needles threading through the darker shadows of the Luftwaffe bombers, and he felt a strange tension grip the street, as if all of London inhaled at once. But the planes moved on toward the Channel, and life resumed, though not quite as it had been before, because once you see war in the sky, you begin to understand that the heavens, once a place for prayers and weather, have been claimed by men with engines and guns. The days that followed made the city feel like it was living beneath a great waiting hand, the kind that could crush or spare you without warning. Sirens grew more frequent, though still not constant, and Arthur learned the meaning of the word scramble, a word shouted on radios inside pubs and printed in headlines, a word that meant some young pilot, barely more than a boy, was sprinting from a bunkhouse to a fighter plane somewhere near the southern coast, trying to get into the sky in time to meet another wave of enemy aircraft. By late July, the Battle of Britain was no longer something distant, it was something that arrived overhead almost daily, the sound of Merlin engines roaring upward from airfields miles away, the deeper hum of Dornier and Heinkel bombers crossing the Channel, the sharp crack of anti-aircraft guns echoing like fireworks behind a grim sort of curtain. Arthur's stall became a peculiar vantage point, where he could watch the rhythm of the city shift from calm to terror and back to a shaky normal within the span of a single afternoon. He remembered one morning when the siren began its rising wail, slow, mournful, unmistakable, and people rushed toward shelters while Arthur hesitated, gripping the edge of his counter as if holding on to something familiar might steady the shaking ground beneath him. The planes came overhead in groups, RAF fighters weaving upward in fast, furious lines, German bombers advancing like a dark tide, and for a moment the world became nothing but noise, engine roars, gunfire popping like angry sparks, and somewhere, the distant thud of bombs falling far beyond the skyline. The first time he saw a bomber shot down, it didn't look real, it looked like a toy plane at first, lazily drifting downward, trailing smoke, until it picked up speed and folded into a spiral, disappearing behind the buildings with a muted, terrible crash. Arthur whispered, Some mother's son is in there, because even when the enemy falls from the sky, a human heart understands that lives are being torn apart on both sides. On August 18, what history would later call the hardest day, Arthur witnessed something he would remember for the rest of his life. A Spitfire came down near Hampstead Heath, trailing smoke, its propeller chewing the air helplessly as it fought to stay aloft. Without thinking, Arthur ran toward the crash site along with dozens of others, men, women, children who had grown numb to danger through repetition. The fighter lay crumpled in a field, metal warped, flames flickering weakly along the fuselage, and the pilot, a boy no older than 20, was slumped in the cockpit, his face burned, his uniform torn. When they dragged him out, his eyes opened just long enough to whisper one word, water. Arthur held a cup to his cracked lips, and the boy managed a ghost of a smile before asking, "Did we get them?" And Arthur felt something break inside him, because in that moment he understood that these pilots, these young men with their whole lives waiting for them, were carrying the weight of the entire nation on their shoulders, and even on the edge of death, all they wanted was to know they had done enough. As August bled into September, the tone of the battle changed. Germany shifted tactics, sending larger formations of bombers, accompanied by fighters, pushing deeper into British airspace, looking to break the RAF once and for all. The days were filled with the constant drone of engines, the scramble of fighters taking off, the grim announcements on the radio that warned of incoming raids. But nothing prepared Arthur for early September, when the Luftwaffe came for London itself, a direct, brutal campaign that would mark the beginning of what history calls the Blitz, though to Arthur it was simply the night the sky wouldn't break. He was manning his stall late in the afternoon when the engines arrived, not a few, not a handful, but hundreds, layered in the sky like a living ceiling of steel wings. People pointed, then froze, then ran, but even in their panic they moved with the particular order of a city that had learned too quickly how to evacuate the streets. Arthur raced to the underground with the crowds, clutching his coin tin not because he cared about the money but because he needed something solid in his hands, something real amid the chaos. In the dim tunnels, people huddled together, families, strangers, children holding dolls, old men pressing handkerchiefs to their mouths, women murmuring songs to soothe their babies. When the bombs fell, the earth trembled in long, rolling waves, dust drifting from the tunnel ceiling like gray snowfall, and the echoes traveled through the underground in heavy, unending groans. Someone began to pray. Someone else began to sing. Arthur closed his eyes and tried to imagine the city above still standing. When they finally emerged after the all clear, the sight stole his breath. London was burning. Entire streets lay cracked open, bricks scattered like broken teeth, flames licked the night air with orange hunger, smoke curled upward in thick pillars, and papers, charred, crumbling, floated through the air like ash-covered snowflakes. A fire engine lay overturned, its wheels still spinning weakly. A church had lost its roof, its empty window frames staring at the night like the sockets of a skull. Yet amid all this ruin, Arthur saw something he never forgot. A group of Londoners gathered around a piano salvaged from a collapsing pub, singing loudly, badly, defiantly, their voices rising in a kind of stubborn triumph that said the city might bend, but it would not break. The Luftwaffe returned night after night, wave after wave, intent on crushing the spirit of the British people, but the RAF would not yield. Pilots flew until their eyes burned from exhaustion, their ears rang with engine roar, their bodies bruised from rapid climbs and dives. Mechanics worked through the nights to patch bullet holes and weld broken frames, often using scavenged parts from wrecked aircraft. Radar operators scanned screens with aching eyes, tracking blips that meant life or death. And civilians like Arthur learned to live between sirens, filling the moments of calm with whatever normalcy they could salvage, selling papers, drinking tea, brushing away soot, pretending the world was not shaking beneath their feet. In mid-September, the Luftwaffe launched massive raids, throwing everything it had into one final effort to destroy the RAF. The skies became an inferno of twisting contrails, burning planes, and the popping roar of gunfire. Arthur watched a Spitfire dive through a formation of enemy bombers like a hawk, its wings flashing in the sun before it disappeared behind a column of smoke. He heard that another group of fighters had intercepted the bombers over Kent, and though he didn't know their names, he imagined young pilots gritting their teeth, gripping their controls, refusing to let the enemy pass. Day after day, the battles raged, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the tide began to turn. German losses mounted. Their formations grew thinner. Their attacks less frequent. And one morning, in early October, Arthur listened to the BBC crackle over a pub radio, announcing that the enemy had withdrawn, that the RAF had held, that the Battle of Britain was over. The pub erupted into cheers, tears, embraces, but Arthur simply sat down and exhaled, long and slow, as if releasing the breath he had been holding for months. Many years later, in 1956, Arthur attended a remembrance ceremony, gray-haired now, walking with a cane from a slip on icy pavement the winter before. He stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, watching veterans in crisp uniforms, listening to speeches that tried, in careful words, to make sense of events that could never fully be contained by language. A man approached him, mid-30s, clean uniform, medals arranged neatly across his chest. The man extended his hand. "You're Arthur Lane, aren't you? The newspaper seller from King's Cross." Arthur blinked in surprise, then nodded. The man smiled, and in that smile Arthur recognized something familiar, something he had seen through smoke and flame 16 years earlier. "You gave me water," the man said softly. Hampstead Heath. August 18th. The pilot. The boy. Now grown, alive, standing tall. Arthur felt tears rise, unbidden, and the man stepped closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. "We did get them, Arthur," he said quietly. "All of us." And Arthur realized then that the Battle of Britain was not won by machines or tactics alone, but by countless acts of courage, some grand, some small, some as simple as giving a dying boy a cup of water or singing around a piano while the world burned. It was won by a city that refused to fall, by pilots who rose again and again into skies that tried to kill them, by civilians who endured the unbearable and kept going. The Battle of Britain was more than a campaign, it was a testament to the stubborn, unyielding spirit of a people who understood that sometimes the only way to survive the darkness is to keep looking upward, even when the sky itself feels like it's on fire. And in the end, Arthur Lane would say that the loudest sound of that whole season, louder than the bombs, the engines, the sirens, was the moment London learned, together, that the night could burn, and still the sky would not break.